Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jason Killeen, and I'm an Assistant Executive Director with the Department of Cannabis Regulation. And we're going to get started with today's Q&A session. Before we get started with the questions that have been submitted, I do just want to let folks know that we're going to be doing a Licensing 101 presentation this Friday. And the presentation is going to cover a bunch of different areas. So I'm just going to briefly go through the agenda for Friday's Licensing 101 session, and then we'll jump into the questions. So as I just mentioned, we're going to be doing a Licensing 101 presentation on Friday, April 14th. The presentation will go from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. We've broken the presentation into 4 one-hour modules. Next slide, please. So the first module will run from 3 to 4 p.m. We'll be talking about navigating the DCR licensing portal, how to create accounts, how to create a business tax registration certificate and get your BTRC number, how to create a licensing business entity record, which is the LBR, which is required to submit an application. We'll be doing a brief overview of the Zoning Information Map Access System, which is ZEMIS. We'll be talking about state and city deadlines, and then we'll go ahead and do a 15-minute Q&A session on those topics. So that'll all run from 3 to 4 p.m. And then once we're done with that segment, we'll jump into part 2. Next slide. And that's going to cover the pre-application review process, local compliance and sensitive uses, general zoning restrictions for the different license activities. We'll go into more in-depth tools on the Zoning Information Map Access System, how we look for zoning-related information, how you can look to create a 700-foot buffer from the parcel that you're proposing as your business, how to look for different sensitive uses on the zoning information map, as well as the DCR licensing map. I'll briefly talk about fees, and again, different state and city deadlines tied to those processes, and then we'll do another 15-minute Q&A session. Next slide, please. And then after that, we'll jump into part 3, which will cover the temporary approval licensing process, the temporary approval workflow, the documents needed for our temporary approval application process, different fees, state and city deadlines, and then we'll do another 15-minute Q&A session. Next slide, please. And then the final part of the Licensing 101 will cover the temporary approval versus the annual licensing processes, what our annual licensing process will be when it starts on Monday, May 1st. We'll be talking a little bit about the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, and then talking about some of the state and city deadlines, and then we'll have a final Q&A session. So folks don't have to attend all of the sessions. Folks can join based on the different subject matter areas that they're interested in or where they are within our processes. And then, of course, all of these materials will be made available after the Licensing 101 session, probably sometime next week, so that folks that are unable to join will have an opportunity to listen to the presentation as well as the questions that were asked. So with that, if we could jump to the next slide, we can jump into today's Q&A session. Gidget, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jason. Good afternoon to everyone. Our first question comes from Bo C. What is the best way to get in touch with DCR staff?
So DCR staff are available Mondays through Thursdays from 10 to 3 p.m., 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. via the DCR licensing at lecity.org email address, or through our phone lines, which is 213-978-0738. We've also opened our public counter on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and the public counter is open from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. So, you know, that's a good way to generally get in touch with the department. But if you already have an application pending and you have an assigned analyst, if you have questions about your application, it's best to reach out directly to your assigned analyst, because they'll have access to the information that's most pertinent to you.
Okay. Dana C. asks, what does one need to do to get movement on an application that has been under review for 2 years and recently again for 2 months? We've tried to reach out repeatedly and are told that documents are under review.
I would reach out to your assigned analyst. And if you don't know who your assigned analyst is, I would email DCR licensing at lecity.org. For folks that are on the record, the licensing analyst will communicate with you about the status of the application. But if you're not listed on the record as a contact, whether it's a law firm, a consultant, the authorized agent, or a primary personnel or owner, then DCR staff are not going to communicate the statuses of that application and or what deficiencies may exist that are preventing it from moving forward. So just make sure that if you are reaching out to inquire about an application, you're listed as a contact on that application.
Our next question is a follow-up from the previous, again from Dana, and this asks about making an appointment with an analyst to answer specific questions.
Again, I would reach out directly to the analyst. If it's a general application question, you can of course reach out to the general phone number, email address, or come visit us during the public counter hours. However, each of the analysts have different assigned days that they're in the office, and finding out when they're available to get in touch with you about specific questions, they're going to know their schedule the best. So I would definitely reach out to them directly.
Thank you, Jason. The next question comes from Rashad E. How can a social equity applicant in phase 1 get funding?
So I'm not sure exactly what the question is pertaining to, but different social equity applicants are eligible for fee waivers or fee deferrals through DCR, either administrative authorization to do the fee deferrals and or grant monies that we've received from the state to provide fee waivers. The department has had different seed grant opportunities, which are also state grant funded. The most recent seed request period closed at the end of last month. And at this time, we don't have any other direct financial assistance available to social equity applicants. But I know Dr. B and her team have been applying for additional state grants. And if more money has become available for a seed program, they'll of course provide information once those grant monies are allocated and what the requirements are to apply for that grant funding would be.
Rashad E also asked, is there a transportation only license similar to a delivery license?
So there are two different license types. The transportation distribution only is a business to business license type, where the licensee may transport cannabis goods between licensees, versus the delivery license is a form of retail license that allows the licensee to deliver cannabis products to a consumer. So instead, distribution transport only is B2B, business to business, and then the delivery is a B2C or business to consumer license type. So they're two very different license types.
Jorge A asks, how do I get a license? What is the process?
I would invite him to join us on Friday at 3 p.m. as we go through the licensing 101 session. And we're going to be discussing specific aspects of the licensing process. And we're going to be pretty much going through everything soup to nuts at the local level. I think our team has already dropped a link in the chat. If not, if we could just go ahead and drop a link. And then in order to get a license, you're going to have to establish your legal business entity, submit necessary forms. Depending on the license type, you may have to go through an equity share review. We have a pre-application review process to determine whether or not your proposed business premises location is eligible for further processing. And if it is, then you'll have the opportunity to submit either a temporary approval application or an annual application, depending on the timing. And we'll go more into depth on those processes on Friday.
Thanks. Jason, this question has many parts. Stop me if you want me to deal with one question first, but I'll go ahead and start. This is from Flora G. We have an approved application from P3 Retail Round 1. Our application is deemed abandoned and we are ready to move forward with refiling. but our SEIA 51% partner has not been responsive. What is DCR's recommendation if the SEIA is not responding to any communications? Can they be replaced with another verified SEIA? We have a lot of money invested and our application expires in August 2023.
So the qualifying social equity individual applicant cannot be removed from an application until a license is issued. So no, the SEIA cannot be removed. If the application has been deemed abandoned, the SEIA is the only party eligible to refile that application. So if the SEIA is not participating, that record's not going to be eligible for refiling because they're of course not going to log in and actually facilitate the process of refiling. And DCR doesn't get involved in business disputes between owners or other parties. So unfortunately, we're not going to step in to try to, get both of the parties to communicate in this matter. But you would need the SEIA to participate in order to submit a new application and move forward if an application is submitted.
Okay, our next question comes from Rick J. When will DCR reach a staffing level of 95%?
I don't know when we'll reach a staffing level of 95%, but the director is doing her best to make sure that we fill all of our vacant positions as soon as possible. Our vacancy rate is on track to fall below 20% next month. We have a number of new hires that'll be coming on board, and we should fall below that 20% vacancy rate sometime next month. And then, as I mentioned, the director's trying to fill all of our vacant positions, and she's trying to do so as soon as possible. And in order to get to that 95% staffing level, we'll have to fill, I think, 55 or 56 out of our 59 positions. But if we are successful in hiring folks, we should be able to do that before the end of the calendar year. And I know she's got a target to try to fall below 10% vacancy by June 30th. So we're doing our best to fill positions as quickly as possible, given the civil service constraints that we operate under.
Okay, moving on. Question from Christian A. Why were social equity applicants selected in the recent lottery given such little time to comply with the state provisional license program?
So, we as a city can't set timelines for the state of California. They have different things that are they've got built into their statute, and they've always intended to phase out provisional licenses. The good news is if you were selected through the lottery and you weren't in a position to pursue a provisional license, DCR has been working with local policymakers to streamline our annual application process, which I'll talk about a little bit more on Friday, so that folks can get peace of mind and get into the state queue to get an annual license from the state. So, again, we have no say over the state's authority to issue provisional licenses, which is set by statute. We did try to give folks as much time as possible to apply for a provisional and meet the requirements. We made our pre-application review process significantly easier by providing fee waivers or fee deferrals to social equity applicants so that we could begin the analysis immediately and not have to wait for them to be paid for. We also issued local compliance and environmental review notifications to social equity applicants that completed the pre-application review process so that they would have everything necessary to submit their state provisional licensing application. So, if you were unable to apply for the provisional license, you still have the ability to apply for an annual license. And at least at the local level, we've made our annual license process much easier so that you can comply with local requirements, which are a prerequisite to then meet the state's annual application requirements. And our local annual application process is going to open up on May 1st, 2023. So if you haven't already submitted a temporary approval application, but you've started the pre-application review process or have a pre-application record that was deemed eligible for further processing, you'll be able to submit your local application for annual licensure beginning on Monday, May 1st.
Thank you, Jason. Our next question comes from Robel M. Where can I get more information on the SEED grant program and where can I apply?
So the most recent iteration of the SEED grant program closed on March 31st. So at this time, we don't have any open SEED grant programs, but I would recommend you sign up for the social equity email list so that as new grant opportunities become available, you can receive information as the social equity team sends out that information and what those opportunities are.
Okay. Our next question comes from Maria L. Can you apply for a license without having a location secured?
You can submit a pre-application review record without having a location secured. As part of the pre-application review process, you're proposing a business premises location, and there's a form that gets submitted with that, which is a landowner attestation, which doesn't require you to have a lease agreement in place or other types of site control for the parcel. If the proposed location is eligible for further processing, you have up to 1 year to submit your application. And when you do submit your application, you will have to have site control. So some type of executed lease, property deed, et cetera. But you do have peace of mind that you have 1 year to submit that application and finish up whatever negotiations you may have to do with the landlord before you submit your application.
Okay, our next question comes from Samuel M. What is the city doing to keep illegal dispensaries permanently closed?
As I've said before, DCR doesn't have jurisdiction to enforce against unlicensed dispensaries. We do provide information to LAPD, which is the lead agency for enforcement against unlicensed businesses. Folks can submit complaints to LAPD or through the complaint portal. If people suspect unlicensed cannabis business activity, and folks could drop a link to the compliance portal or the complaint portal so that folks know where to submit those complaints. And then, of course, as unlicensed businesses pop up, it's a combination of trying to get them to stop selling unlicensed and untested cannabis products and then encourage them to apply for a license if they're eligible to.
Our next question from Randy W. How do I exchange my license to focus on another activity rather than retail?
So I'm not 100% clear on it. If you have a license, then if you're not interested in engaging in that activity anymore, you can withdraw, abandon, cancel, or let the license expire. And then you, of course, have the opportunity to submit an application for the activity types that you would like to pursue. But you would have to submit a separate application if you want to engage in a different commercial cannabis activity, and then, of course, meet the requirements for licensure for that activity.
Thank you, Jason. The next one comes from Tiffany W. And she asks, are all fees waived for social equity phase 3 retail round 2?
So DCR has set aside grant dollars to cover the basic DCR application fees for phase 3 retail round 2 applicants. The basic fees that are covered by the grants include the initial pre-application review of the legal business entity record, equity share review, and the application fees. Renewal fees and fees due to other agencies, such as the state of California, aren't covered by our existing grant dollars, so you would be on the hook to pay those fees yourself. But our local fees are pretty much covered.
This is a follow-up question from Tiffany. Will additional grant funding become available?
My assumption is the social equity team will continue to be successful in applying for and being granted monies through the state in their grant programs. I don't know if we'll have additional monies for direct financial assistance through the SEED program. That's really going to depend on what the grantors include in the grant programs and what the eligible uses are. But we do continue to get allotments of money from the state to provide assistance to our social equity applicants. And Dr. B and her team are always doing their best to pursue every grant opportunity. Unfortunately for the city, as more California cities develop and bring their own local equity programs online, the pot of money is getting split more ways, and we're seeing fewer grant dollars coming in, which will impact our ability to provide that same level of financial assistance or assistance to folks that are going to be pursuing opportunities in the near future. So hopefully the state will look to change their allocation program to kind of look at the size of the program, or include additional monies into these grant opportunities so that we can see future levels of grant funding consistent with what we've seen in the past, so we can still continue to provide the same level of service and support to our social equity applicants.
Okay, moving on. This next question comes from Maurice C. Can existing cultivation licenses downgrade their indoor cultivation license to a processing license?
So changes in the cultivation license type, whether or not it's scaling up or scaling down, is reviewed and done through the business premises modification process by looking at a revised business premises diagram that reflects how you're going to modify your cultivation activities. So if you do in fact submit a business premises modification request and you outline how the cultivation activity would be changing versus your existing approved plan, we could go ahead and consider that change through that process.
Okay, our next question from Bobby A. We are part of the 200 applications from Phase 3 Retail Round 1. Our application is deemed abandoned with a 1-year extension and the expiration date of May 26, 2022. Is DCR giving more extensions, or must the refiling be done before the expiration date?
Good question. So earlier this year, well, actually last year, DCR had proposed an extension to the refiling to change it from 1 year to 3 years. In February, the City Council approved that DCR recommendation, and the City Attorney's Office is working on the ordinance to effectuate those changes. And hopefully the draft ordinance gets transmitted to the City Council, and then the City Council acts on it. We do anticipate that the 1-year extension will convert over to a 3-year extension, and we won't be fully closing out records until policymakers have had that opportunity to review the draft ordinance and make any corrections to it and or adopt it. But if you don't see traction and you do intend to refile, or you see that the council has taken out that recommendation, which again, they did approve back in February. So I would anticipate that when they see it in the ordinance, they're going to leave it alone. But if you are concerned, you can refile by May 26th. And if your pre-app is deemed eligible for further processing, you'd have up to 1 year to submit your application. If you see the ordinance moving forward and it's looking like it's going to be adopted by the City Council, of course, that 1 year will become 3 years, and you wouldn't have to refile by May 26th.
Our next question comes from Jesse F. Will there be additional grant funding for the selected round 3 lottery participants, since we were only eligible for $10,000 in the last disbursement?
So at this time, there's no additional seed grant monies to provide direct financial assistance to social equity applicants beyond the program that ended on March 31st. If more funds become available, the department, of course, will notice our existing social equity applicants and folks that are eligible to apply for those grant dollars, and then they would make another seed program available to folks to get that direct financial assistance. But at this time, we don't have any additional monies beyond what's already been distributed.
Thank you, Jason. Our next question comes from Carlos M. What if I'm having problems with my social equity partner? For example, what if your investor is applying for applications without your knowledge?
DCR does not get involved in business disputes or disputes between owners or partners. What I would encourage you to do is make sure that folks associated with the applicant or licensee are on the same page, because material misrepresentations, omissions of facts, those types of things could result in the denial of an application or the revocation of a license. So folks need to be careful as they submit information to the department to make sure that one party or another is not openly deceiving the city, because it could have a negative impact on the record before the city, and it could ultimately result in the denial or revocation of an application record or a license.
Thank you. Our next question from Rachel W. asks, now that the provisional application deadline has passed, what is the time frame for approvals for annual licenses?
I would invite folks to tune into the Licensing 101 on Friday for more information. But in a nutshell, DCR is going to be opening the annual application process on Monday, May 1st. Folks will have the opportunity to submit their annual license applications. We've already gotten authority from the Department of City Planning to use their bench of environmental consultants to draft the environmental reports that will have to be adopted alongside with the annual licenses. For folks that have already submitted their 4013 forms, we're already working on that analysis. If you haven't already submitted your 4013 form and you have temporary approval, you're eligible to submit it. And of course, the 4013 form will be a required form with the annual license application. And then it really just comes down to how quickly you can meet the application requirements. We do anticipate that complete applications will be reviewed within 30 to 90 days. And then as part of the annual application process, there's different noticing requirements that are built into that process that once we've determined the application is complete, start to kick in. But we've done our best to work with our local policymakers to make our initial annual application process as similar to the temporary approval process as possible, so that processing timeframes will be similar to the TA process. What folks will see is the annual licensing process is intended to get people through that initial decision-making process so that they can apply for their state annual license and then apply for necessary permits with public health or building and safety or any of the other agencies that they'll have to comply with. And then once they've received their state annual license and any other permits that they're required to get, they would come back to the DCR, request a final inspection. And if they pass their final inspection, they'll be issued an operating permit that would allow them to utilize their annual license. So again, that's the process, the quick and dirty version of the process. And I welcome folks to tune in on Friday for a more in-depth review of the process and what those timeframes look like.
Thanks, Jason. We have completed those questions that have been pre-submitted, and we're going to try to answer as many questions that were submitted via the Q&A function on Zoom. The first one comes from Silvana. There is recent news that cultivators have not been renewing their cultivation licenses. Has LA seen a drop in cultivation renewals?
I mean, there's been a slight drop in cultivation renewals or for folks shifting between cultivation license types based on their own business needs, but it hasn't drastically impacted the capacity for how many licenses DCR could issue before undue concentration would be reached.
Thank you. We have two attendees who asked similar questions, Tiffany W. and Emily H. When is an applicant's retail location locked or its flag otherwise planted? In other words, when does an applicant know that another retail applicant cannot invalidate its location due to being within 700 feet?
So under Municipal Code Section 105, it stipulates that a business with on-site retail sales cannot be within 700 feet of another business with on-site retail sales that has received a license, so temporary approval or an annual license, has paid the temporary approval application fee, or has paid their business premises relocation fee. So your flag is planted the earlier of when you've received your license, you paid your temporary approval application fee, or your business premises relocation fee was paid. Folks that complete the pre-application review process and are deemed eligible for further processing have not planted a flag. They are protected from sensitive uses such as daycare, schools, libraries that may come in within that year after they were deemed eligible. But other commercial cannabis businesses with on-site retail sales are not considered a sensitive use. Therefore, people can continue to move around, submit new applications, and submit to relocate. And until you've done what is necessary to plant your flag, another business could file before you and ultimately bump you out.
Thank you, Jason. Our next question comes from Rahim. Could you discuss a new municipal code that was passed regarding surrendering a retail location due to landlord issues and now being able to apply in zones that have already met undue concentration?
So as part of our recommendations, we've looked to expand why a application may be deemed abandoned. So for businesses that lose site control for whatever reason, whether they can't execute the lease, their landlord doesn't renew the lease, they're in a landlord-tenant dispute and they no longer have access to the premises, they can submit the business premises surrender form, which will ultimately result in the abandonment of a pending application. And then that gives them the ability to refile. Currently, abandoned applications may be refiled in the original community plan area that the application was filed in, or in a community plan area that has not reached undue concentration. In terms of applying in an area that has reached undue concentration, the only way to do that would be through the public convenience or necessity process. So DCR does not have the authority to work on an application subject to a finding of undue concentration unless or until the Los Angeles City Council approves a public convenience or necessity finding, which then enables DCR to accept the application and process it.
Thank you, Jason. Our next question comes from Amir. If I've received an invoice with an Los Angeles Fire Department and temporary approval application fee, once I pay the LAFD fee with the Department of Finance, will DCR waive or defer my temporary approval application fee so that my application can be further processed?
I mean, the big caveat here is in order to be eligible for a fee waiver or a fee deferral for the temporary approval application, you will have to be a social equity applicant. Once we get into the annual application process, the local jurisdiction assistance grant, the LOJAG grant, has provided monies to DCR to provide fee waivers for the categorical exemption review, as well as the annual application fees for all applicants. So general applicants and social equity applicants will all benefit from those grant dollars. But specifically for the TA, you do have to be a social equity applicant. And we will apply either the fee deferral or the fee waiver based on what type of record it is. The phase 3 retail round 2 folks are eligible for fee waivers. Phase 2 folks may be eligible for a fee deferral on refiled applications. And then, of course, if you're a different type of social equity applicant, I would recommend reaching out to the department during general business hours to find out what deferrals or waivers may be available to you in advance of the opening of the annual application process.
Our next question is related. It comes from Tiffany W. Are there fee waivers applied to DCR invoices, which include LAFD inspection fees and the temporary approval application fee?
So again, for social equity applicants, DCR has the ability to provide either a fee waiver or a fee deferral, depending on the record type for the DCR related fees. But the applicant would have to pay applicable fees to other city agencies. So you would have to pay the LAFD inspection fee. And when you pay it to the Office of Finance, who also collects fees on behalf of the LAFD, they'll clear your payment within the LAFD portal, and then LAFD will recognize you as a client. But DCR doesn't have the ability to provide fee waivers for non-DCR fees.
Thank you. Maurice C. asks, if I have a temporary approval for medium indoor cultivation with a corresponding state license, do I need a second medium indoor temporary approval to obtain a second state license?
The answer to that would be yes. So the medium indoor cultivation activity allows you to cultivate up to a certain square footage. And then if you want to exceed that square footage, you'll need additional licenses, or you'd have to change the cultivation license type to go to a bigger amount. And medium indoor is the highest or the largest cultivation size DCR currently issues. So if you need to exceed the 22,000 square feet allotted by that, you would have to pursue another cultivation license.
Thank you, Jason. The next question comes from N. Boraf. Did the Plum Committee pass the proposal for requiring a licensee to file a semi-annual report on good faith hiring requirements before the final day of February? If it was not passed, what is DCR's role in helping licensees meet good faith hiring requirements?
So the recommendation to align the reporting with the renewal process was approved by the City Council, and it will be reflected in the upcoming ordinance. The goal there is to have folks file those reports along with their renewal documents, and it would kick in when the annual application process and annual licenses begin to be issued. I know the social equity team and their vendors have been putting together materials to help applicants and licensees understand what their requirements, what their obligations are to meet those good faith hiring requirements. So if you haven't already done so, I would reach out to the social equity team to see whether or not you're eligible to tap into the learning management system, or LMS, to access those materials.
Thank you, Jason. Our next question comes from Silvana. How many PCN requests have been granted by City Council for retail licenses?
Off the top of my head, I want to say 6 PCN findings have been made. And then when DCR had the authority to begin reviewing those applications, 5 were eligible for further processing, and 1 was deemed ineligible due to its proximity to a sensitive use.
Okay, our next question comes from Amir asking about updates on the licensing map and asking if it would be done on a daily, weekly basis instead of on a monthly basis.
So by statute, sensitive uses are only updated quarterly. So when we pull the information, and the next time we pull the quarterly information is going to be on Monday, May 1st. So that data is going to be used for the annual licensing process and any new pre-application review records that are submitted. Basically, we go through that data and then we provide the list to the Department of City Planning, and then they refresh the different sensitive use layers. And those sensitive use layers should be stagnant for the next period of time until we get new sensitive use data on the quarterly refresh. For the different types of records, we are working with Excella and City Planning to interface the ArcGIS Online with the DCR licensing portal so that the records that are presented in the licensing portal get updated on a daily or a weekly basis. But we haven't implemented that into production yet, and hopefully that will be implemented in the coming months.
Okay, our next question comes from Rahim. What if a retail location is in a zone that has 3 licenses available and with 4 applicants already? If I apply and go through the process and pay fees faster, etc., would I have a chance to be licensed prior to the applicants ahead of me?
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, hypothetically, DCR has 4 applications pending in a community plan area that only has capacity for 3 licenses. Undue concentration isn't triggered until DCR has issued all of the available licenses. So there are community plans like Hollywood where we have more applications pending than we have authority to issue licenses. What'll happen is the licensees that meet the licensing requirements first will be issued licenses. And then once we reach undue concentration, any other pending applications would be referred to the public convenience or necessity process. And then it would be up to the city council to basically make a PCN finding. And if they do make the PCN finding, that would enable DCR to continue processing the application request. So if you do reach licensure prior to the applicants that submitted before you, you can receive a license before the other applicants. It really comes down to how quickly an applicant, regardless of when they submitted, meet the requirements to be issued a license.
Thank you, Jason. Moving on, we have a question from Emily H. Assuming the applicant is an equity applicant, when is DCR applying the equity fee waiver for the TA application? Does the applicant need to submit a TA application documents first?
A social equity applicant needs to submit the corresponding DCR record, which in this case would be a temporary approval application, before a fee waiver or fee deferral would be applied. Once you've submitted the record for DCR review, the system will add the fees to that record. And then when we start reviewing the records, to identify what type of record it is. If staff identified as a social equity record, then either a fee waiver, which would remove the fees from the record, or a fee deferral, which keeps the fees on the record, but allows DCR to begin working on the record before the fees get paid, would be noted. But it does take a few days from the point that the record is created for staff to have the opportunity to go through and identify whether or not the record does qualify for a deferral or a waiver. And once they've made that determination, they go ahead and make the necessary updates on the record. But we do have to have a record before us to apply the deferral to waivers to in order to apply the deferral or waivers.
Thank you, Jason. The next question I'm going to ask, I'm not sure if I'm following, but maybe you'll have better luck than I do. It comes from MS. I understand that reimbursements are not applicable. Is it possible to receive a credit in the amount that was paid out of pocket? As long as grant funds are still available, can SEIA apply the credit?
I'm not, yeah, I'm with you there. You know, hypothetically, if a phase 3 retail round 2 applicant submitted their temporary approval application or their pre-application review record, got the invoice, paid the invoice, and they were eligible for a fee waiver through the grant programs, DCR could work with the Office of Finance to take that amount that was paid and have it be a credit on their taxpayer account, which would allow them to either apply the credit towards future fees or future tax obligations. But we would have to review, you know, what was paid and then determine whether or not a fee waiver was available to that applicant at the time the fee was made. You know, off the top of my head right now, it would really only kick in for the phase 3 retail round 2 applicants. And, you know, other folks would be available to get a fee deferral, but the deferred fees are still due. So I don't know if we'd be able to provide a credit under those circumstances. You know, I'd have to really look at what the individual information was, the phase, the record type, the applicant, when the fees got paid, et cetera, to determine whether or not a credit could be applied.
Thanks, Jason. Our next question comes from Silvana. Regarding adding a second medium indoor cultivation license, can that be associated to the same premises, or is it one premises per license?
Great question. So, you know, multiple cultivation licenses can be associated with the same parcel or premises. It's just the licensees can't have overlapping premises. So, you know, if you had a 40,000 square foot, warehouse and you had one medium indoor license associated with 22,000 square feet, and you were going to go to stacked beds, you could submit a premises diagram to show the stacked beds that reflect 11,000 square feet in one part and then apply for a new license for the other part. Or you could use some of the remaining amount that's not allocated to cultivation and submit a business premises update to allocate it to a new cultivation license type. So there's no distancing restriction between cultivation businesses or cultivation licenses. They can be co-located in the same premises or on the same parcel, provided that each license has its own distinct footprint and they don't overlap with the footprint for any other cultivation licenses. So hopefully that helps and makes sense.
The next question comes from Tiffany W. and seems to need some clarification on the fee waivers and planting the flag. So this is her question. It seems we need to pay the fee to plant the flag, but at the same time, fee waivers are being applied. Am I supposed to pay or wait for the fee waiver? Will the fees be refunded if the fee was supposed to be waived? What if another location conflicts?
So the way the fee waivers work is the fee waiver is retro to when the record was submitted. So regardless of whether or not you pay the fee or you wait for the fee waiver to be applied, the timestamp associated with the submission of that record is going to dictate, when the flag gets planted. So there's no benefit to getting the invoice and trying to rush to finance to pay it if you're eligible for a fee waiver. If you do pay a fee to finance, DCR doesn't have the authority to grant refunds. So the best we could do is work with finance to have whatever amount paid be converted to a credit on your account. But given the fact that, most social equity applicants are available to get a variety of fee waivers tied to the application process, the annual application process, the environmental review, it's unlikely that in the near future there would be a DCR fee other than a renewal fee that the credit could be applied to. The credit can be applied to tax obligations, but of course you would have to have a license and the ability to operate before you could use the credit for that particular activity. So if you are eligible for a fee waiver, I would hold tight and wait for the fee waiver to be applied, because the timestamp for when the record was submitted is when the flag would be planted for folks that are eligible for fee waivers. And ultimately, if more than one pre-application review record was deemed eligible and both of those applicants are eligible for a fee waiver, the party that submitted their application first would have pole position. And if it was a complete application, then of course, they're the one who plants the flag first.
Thank you, Jason. We've got 5 minutes left and 2 questions. Do you think you can do it?
I can get through the 2 questions. I don't know if I'll do them both in 5 minutes though, but I'll stick around to do it.
Okay, thank you. MS asks, the licensing map now shows affordable housing. Can you please confirm that affordable housing is not a sensitive use?
Affordable housing by itself is not a sensitive use. Permanent supportive housing that provides on-site support services is considered a sensitive use. So this is one of the areas where something may be on the licensing map that lets a prospective applicant know that there could be a sensitive use. And if you see if you see it as a potential permanent supportive housing location, you'll have to do additional due diligence. If you submit the record, DCR does the due diligence when we start doing the pre-application review. If we see a flag there, then we'll go and we'll look at the particular property to determine if it's permanent supportive housing. If it is in fact permanent supportive housing, do they provide the on-site services to the groups of individuals that the housing is provided to? It does have to be permanent supportive housing, and they do have to provide on-site services in order for it to be considered a sensitive use. So there's more due diligence that goes into that review than something, let's say a park or a library, where it either is or it isn't. And if it's on our map, it is.
Perfect, thank you. And then our last question from Raheem. If an applicant gets a notice for inspection and fails to pass that inspection or abandons the application, how long would it take for that 700-foot buffer zone to get released?
It depends. So there's 2 pieces there. The first piece is the inspection. So if you fail to pass the inspection, but you still have site control of the business premises and you intend to move the application forward, assuming the application fees were paid and you're working with your analyst, we haven't taken the flag out of the ground. If you surrender the business premises or the record is deemed abandoned, at the time that happens is when the flag gets removed, and then the buffer that may have been associated with that location is also removed, which enables other applicants to apply for or try to move into somewhere within that original 700-foot buffer.
Let's see. We're at the 1 o'clock hour. There's another question in the chat, another one or two. Do you want to answer those now or wait for the next Q&A?
I've got a few more minutes, so if we can get through them today,
Okay.
it'll save me from having to answer them on Friday.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. The next question from MS. Are DCR land use reviewers slowing down and improving the pre-app if they see an affordable housing flagged on the map?
They're not slowed down. It's not like we see, oh, there's a potential sensitive use there and we set the record aside. What happens is, if the land use reviewer sees a potential sensitive use, they do the analysis then and there. And, for affordable housing, they would look to see if it qualifies as permanent supportive housing, the on-site services. Only if we need to get additional information from the applicant or the housing department would it slow down the review or the processing of the record. But generally, we have sufficient information when we do the review to make a determination one way or the other. Only when we need a proposed business premises to do mapping where it may or may not fall within the buffer of the sensitive use, or it's unclear whether or not on-site services are provided at the location, do we need to get additional confirmation from either the applicant or the housing department before we can complete the analysis.
Our next question from Tiffany W. If two applications are within 700 feet, both are social equity, what if one of the apps is incomplete? Will the other get the flag planted?
If the first one is incomplete and the analyst identifies the deficiencies and then the applicant cures those deficiencies before the application is deemed abandoned, then the one that has the earlier timestamp is the one that's going to have the flag planted and be eligible to move forward. In the event that it's an incomplete application, the applicant doesn't respond or cure the deficiencies within the time provided by DCR, then of course it would result in the abandonment of the record. And once it's abandoned, the flag would be removed, which enables a different applicant to move forward within that original 700-foot buffer zone.
And then one last question. I'm being told that a nursery license cannot be combined with other activities on the same record. Is this true?
You can't apply for multiple cultivation activity types on the same record. And then there's certain license types that there's limitations on, what you can do with the license that may preclude you from selecting activities that may ultimately get you compliance related issues. Because when we do the land use review and the pre-app record gets submitted, what we've tried to do is allow folks to select activities that have similar zoning requirements and distancing requirements from sensitive uses, to make sure that if the premises is deemed eligible for further processing, those activities can move forward. And in the event where there's different zones or there's different distancing requirements, you can't select those incompatible ones, because we had situations in the past where somebody would apply for something and one of the activities was ineligible and it made the whole record ineligible for further processing, and that led to frustration. So if you have a specific question, I would reach out during the office hours, and we could provide guidance on what activities can be commingled. And then, of course, if it's something that can be commingled and you're having difficulties associated with the record and you've already submitted it, we may be able to make the adjustments in the back office so that the applicant can move forward with the pre-app review on the record based on the activities that they do want to apply for.
Thank you, Jason.
Cool. And if there are no other questions, I really appreciate folks tuning in today for today's Q&A. I do want to remind folks that our next Q&A will be on Wednesday, May 10th at noon. And we do have our big licensing 101 presentation on Friday, May 14th. And we'll be going from 3 to 7 p.m. There's 4 different modules. There will be 4 different Q&A sessions tied to the different things covered in the module. We've intended to kind of cover the entire process soup to nuts so that folks that haven't started with the application process can understand everything that they're going to need to do in order to get their annual license. And then for existing applicants and licensees, we've broken it in so that you can join later in the day based on where you are in our process. And then, of course, all of those materials in the presentation will be made available the following week. So if you're unable to attend, you will still have access to the presentation and the recordings and then answers to any of the questions that were asked. I do believe our communications team will be sending out a reminder for the licensing 101, as well as giving folks an opportunity to pre-submit questions for the modules. So if you are interested in attending and you do have some questions, you can go ahead and get those questions pre-submitted. And then I look forward to talking to folks on Friday. Bye, everybody. Have a great day.